So my side bias is a kind of tribalism. Oh, my side's right. My religion is right. My belief system is right. Everybody else is not merely wrong, but they're bad people. So if you believe certain things, it's not merely that you're lacking, like Plato says in the Theaetetus, it's not merely that you're lacking a piece of information. It's an entirely different move. It's kind of a Nietzschean move from we don't have enough information to you're a bad person for believing this. So my side bias is the most difficult thing to overcome. It's the most, how do you get people to break through to that tribalism? Like, how do you get them to even honestly evaluate information? That's where street epistemology comes in, which is another conversation. So how did we get here now? We can still have, it's called instrumental rationality. We can still have the telos, or the end of certain means of production in our technological infrastructure. Like, we can create phones, there's a market mechanism for that. We can create cameras, we can create lights, we can create all these things, but that is only in one very specific domain. And that domain is the technological domain. There are no relativists at 50,000 feet in the air when they're flying in a plane. It's all verbal behavior. It's all nonsense. Nobody is talking about a social construct when they go into the bank and the guy that they want to change $100 and they give him $8 in change in singles. And then nobody's saying, well, that's just your reality. So this is all just verbal behavior. Nobody actually believes. Nobody, when their kids get sick, nobody will take their kids, well, virtually nobody in the West, all the people who are clamoring on about relativism and they're clamoring on about patriarchy, et cetera. When their kids get sick, they're not taking them to the female witch doctor.
It feels like maybe one of the things that's happening here is this difference between what's the so-called hard sciences and the soft sciences or the social sciences. Is that part of why that works? So, hey, if whether or not this medicine actually alleviates the underlying condition is something we can measure. But that's not even on the hardest side. So the hardest side would be, oh, how do sound waves move into this microphone and then get recorded onto some magnetic digital device? And we can write that out on paper and then we can see if that works. And that's called physics and engineering. And that's hard science. Some work close to that, but more in the middle is like, oh, does this medicine work? That's still soft. That's kind of softer. The body's complicated. And then there's the outcomes we see in America are the product of systemic racism. And that's on the other side of the spectrum, because it's like, well, we can't really test that really at all. And it's all soft and complicated. And how would you falsify it? Is that what's going on?
Somewhat. So with the microphone, it's less likely that there's ideological static injected in the system. Right? So you're just trying to figure something out. Now, what's interesting is that there are exceptions even to that. So, for example, the way that you study, the people you select to study themselves could be ideologically captured. So, for example, we want diversity statements from people. So, or we want, now I know that link might seem tenuous, but I'll make it. Anytime you take any characteristic other than merit into account, then you compromise the objective of what you're trying to do. So, for example, a great illustration of this is professional sports teams. Anytime you take, for example, race into account in professional sports teams, or sexual orientation, you're compromising the goal of actually winning. So even the phenomenon like the microphone that we study is itself subject to ways of studying it. Now, I know that must sound like postmodern claptrap, but it's actually quite true. So you go from that. I mean, look, you can think about it like medicine. Do you remember? You obviously know the word. You know the word triage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So do you remember in the pandemic they were talking about triaging who gets vaccinations based on race? So, for example, people with a lot of historical oppression markers, they're going to get the vaccination first, and then white men will get the vaccination last. So, even within those systems, you can inject ideological bias. Or we talked about psychology, which is on the other end from the microphones, it's softer science, but those things themselves, I mean, that's what validity is. That's what replication is. We can replicate a study to see if the conditions we created improve treatment modalities, improve outcomes. And if we can't do that, if those can't be replicated, then it's a massive question mark about whether clinicians should use them in the first place. But what you study is itself determined by the ideologies of the people who go into it. I mean, this is the one thing that nobody can talk about, but I'll throw it out there. Like race and IQ would be an example. There's a truth of the matter to be had. People won't touch it with a 10-foot pole, and when they do, the cost for them studying it is way up, like Charles Murray. The cost for them studying, or even Sam Harris, who interviewed Charles Murray on that now infamous podcast. Even having people on. So there's multiple levels of ideology that are operative in any system. They're operative in the hard sciences, soft sciences. But yes, to answer your question, I hope that wasn't too long-winded. The more you go toward your right, away from the microphone and hard technology, the more you traverse that distance, the more ideology will play a role. But that doesn't mean that ideology doesn't play a role in any other part of the inquiry. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I think it tracks with it, but it also, to some extent, it suggests a kind of underlying fundamental challenge, which has been, it seems like, exploited, which is that the more we have complexity and uncertainty, the more likely it is for us to sort of become baseline ideology and tribe oriented in the way we confront a challenge. So this is expressed in an interesting place, which is you have Silicon Valley firms comprised of engineers who've also like gone all in culturally, internally on identity politics. So like identity politics doesn't help you make video compression algorithms work better over the internet. It plays no role in that. And yet, for some reason, these two things can exist within the same person, that they can be working on the next video compression for YouTube and know what that is like to do and to see improvement. Like, oh, if I tweak this, wow, the file's smaller. Okay, like, hypothesis, test, see the result. Oh, it worked, it didn't work. And yet hold within them that, well, no, that domain is that, but over here is this other way of being. And I guess we confront this stuff all the time, right? And we confront it as students when we decide what we want to study or where our passions are. And I feel like that's the part is it that we can't have, like, how do we start to bend the social sciences and the soft stuff back to an honest pursuit? Or is it actually baked into the cake that it can't be an honest pursuit? I guess that's my question. Is it sort of a doomed enterprise?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is yes and no. The solution is obvious, and I'm hesitant to say easy, but it kind of is easy. So the first order of business is everything we're really talking about here can be boiled down to a disposition. We're talking about certain dispositions that people have to adopt when they inquire into how the world works, right? So, for example, with creationism, the idea is you want to say, oh, well, geez, well, how old is the Earth? Is the Earth closer to 10,000 years, or how old is the universe? Is it closer to 1 billion years or 1,000? Like, how do we do this? And what we do is we then look to the epistemic landscape. In other words, we look to the information and data that we have, and then we are honest with ourselves and we put a picture together. Now, the key word in that sentence is honest, right? So we're honest with ourselves, but what we don't do is we don't start with the conclusion first and work backward. So we don't start with the fact that the Earth is 10,000 years old. We're going to look to our epistemic landscape and only pull in data that supports the conclusion because we know the conclusion must be right, and anything else we'll just chuck as anomalous or offensive or ridiculous or a higher error rate or what have you. That's not how honest inquirers look. But what's interesting about that is, I'm assuming you and I can look at that example and say, well, duh, that's obvious. But the exact phenomenon is the exact phenomenon is taking place in parallel in our institutions with questions of systemic racism, for example. Like, we know there are so this is Ibram Kendi's thing. Every disparity in outcome is due to systems. Okay, that's just insane. I mean, it's completely insane. But okay, let's run with it. So if you believe that every disparity in outcome is due to systems, then all you would need to do, because that's the truth, like that's apodictic. You're starting with that truth and you're working backward to it. The problem is that most people do that in most things in their life. And I would say virtually everybody does it sometimes. The thing that I cannot understand, that I've been doing this for so long, reading, thinking, and writing about this, I cannot understand why some people have an apparent immunity to these things. I have not been able to figure that out yet. And that's not explained merely by disposition. Like, if you have a disposition to revise your belief, that's a huge one, by the way. Like, the willingness and the ability to revise your belief, in other words, to change your mind. If you are genuinely honest with yourself and you want to find truth, and you'll be willing to consider things that you might find offensive. If you have those dispositions, so one of the things that's running through my head in this is, I have 2 kids and they're both gay, right? So my kids are wonderful kids. I love them to death. They're my whole life. Love them to death. But that being said, would I change my mind about gay marriage? I'm pro-gay marriage. If I looked at the data and I saw that the data that was rigorous and robust and fairly compiled, and it was cross-cultural, and it said that, homosexual marriage has all these bad outcomes on kids, would I change my mind about policies on gay marriage? Like, that would be an example of a belief in which the evidence and data contradict the moral impulses that we have. In every single case, and to be clear, I'm very much pro-gay marriage, because I don't think that data exists. But I have to be open to the possibility of revising my belief if data comes in. In fact, that's what it means to formulate a belief on the basis of evidence. To formulate a belief on the basis of evidence means, by definition, that there has to be some evidence that comes in that causes you to rethink what it is that you believe. Now, if you say, well, I'm not going to change my belief no matter what, there is no evidence. Okay, great, wonderful. That means that your belief is not formulated on the basis of evidence. It's formulated on the basis of something else. Because if it were formulated on the basis of evidence, you'd be willing to change it if new evidence came in. But if you're not willing to change it, that means it's not formulated on the basis of evidence. So what's it formulated on? Does that make sense?
So it does. So, I mean, I think at some level, if I can just play back my understanding of what you're saying, is that the path is cut straight through humility and curiosity. That if you want to be someone who has any level of confidence that your ideas are true, you need to do that by way of first saying, I don't know what the truth is, and I have to be curious enough to ask questions and be willing to let the answers surprise me.
That's part of it, yes. The other part is you have to have, again, a disposition, and this is in the American Philosophical Association's Delphi Report, 1990-1991. You need to have a disposition to seek out relevant information. Like, you have to seek out in philosophy what are called defeaters, or conditions under which your beliefs could be false. Like, you have to have a kind of propensity, that intellectual curiosity has to manifest itself in such a way that you actively go out looking for reasons for why your beliefs could be false. And literally nobody does that. I mean, that's just not the way we're wired. That takes a truly incredible amount of work. And you need a kind of I don't know, you need a kind of like super disposition to do that, because we all navigate life. We're busy, we're working, we got jobs, we got obligations, how on earth are we going to go out and seek out defeaters for some beliefs that make it easy for us to navigate reality?
If you like this clip, you should check out the full video and all the other great content we've got at Dad Saves America. So be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you won't miss our new stuff as it drops each week.